Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and with me again is David Kirkpatrick. How you doing?
Doing great, you?
Doing good, and we got another special guest here with us. Joining us again is Mr. James Prichard. How you doing?
Doing fine tonight. Good to be back with you all.
Well, thank you again for joining us. We got some more great Kentucky history to talk about, some little bit northeastern Kentucky history that is probably not as talked about as much. And as the channel's purpose is to get that history out there so more people can learn what great Kentucky history there is out there. Before we get too deep into it, Mr. Pritchard, tell us a little bit about yourself and your Kentucky connection for those people who may not remember you from last time.
Oh, sure. I'm a native of Dayton, Ohio, but my parents were from northeastern Kentucky. My late brother and I, during our childhood, spent every summer in Carter County, Kentucky, with our maternal grandparents. And I was the kind of kid that loved to sit and listen to the old folks tell stories. And so that was the beginning of my interest in regional history, and it branched out into an interest in Kentucky history. I supervised the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives Research Room for about 25 years, from 1985 to 2008. And then I worked another 10 years in the Special Collections Department at the Filson Historical Society in Louisville, where I live now. And I continue to give lectures around the state, do a little bit of writing every now and then, magazine articles, working on a book right now that relates to the Civil War in northeastern Kentucky. So so far my retirement has been very enjoyable.
Well, that's what we all want, is a good, enjoyable retirement. Yeah, well, that's very good. We won't hold the Dayton, Ohio against you. You've been in Kentucky long enough. We can accept you with open arms, of course.
And if you've ever been to Dayton, or at least the Dayton that I grew up in, there was a good chunk of eastern Kentucky, and with a little bit of West Virginia and Southwest Virginia that floated up there after World War II. So I ate my share of beans and cornbread north of the Ohio.
There you go. Yeah. Well, so when we're talking about the subject today, we're talking about night riders, but in northeastern Kentucky. But what's unique about this branch or this topic of night riders compared to others?
Well, your recent feature on the night riders in Western Kentucky caught my eye. And, correct me if I'm wrong. My impression is that was almost like part of like labor unrest, labor dispute. The regulator uprising of 1879 in northeastern Kentucky was a vigilante uprising. And for my money, it was probably the largest vigilante uprising in Kentucky history.
Wow.
Yeah, Elliott County, which is located on the headwaters of the Little Sandy River, was the epicenter. Mm-hmm. And although the county was formed in 1869, during the Civil War years, when it was part of Carter, Morgan, and Lawrence County, it was a hotbed of guerrilla activity.
Mhm.
And guerrilla bands based in present-day Elliott County raided as far down as uh, Flemingsburg and Owensville. They raided Moorhead, Grayson and Carter County, raided portions of Greenup County, Lawrence County, Johnson County, and one band in particular from present-day Elliott County robbed the Ashland Bank in Boyd County in the fall of 1863. So it was a war within the war.
Mhm.
Most of the people who engaged in the struggle there were either Union Home Guards or Confederate guerrillas. And once the war ended, most of them remained there. And so what had once been pre-war neighbors, friends, and family became post-war former enemies in that respect. And so that was the warriors sowed the seeds for a lot of violence and particularly criminal activity. Um, I found a Lexington newspaper article in 1879 when the vigilante outbreak occurred that more or less described Elliott County as having become a haven for murderers and outlaws ever since the Civil War.
Mhm.
And this would include organized gangs of horse thieves that stretched from Ohio to Virginia. And so, once again, Elliott County, if we believe the newspaper reports, was an epicenter for the lawlessness that occurred in northeastern Kentucky well into the 1880s.
Well, that I don't think I've been to Elliott County. Hopefully, it's calmed down since then, right?
Well, one individual wrote to the governor and said that during the uprising, he said he would not venture into Elliott County unless he had an artillery piece. But the most egregious act of crime in Elliott County's history took place on November 20th, 1877. And this is almost like a juvenile delinquency situation. But some young men who had a grudge against the residents of the county seat, which was then known as Martinsburg, today it's known as Sandy Hook, uh, burned most of Martinsburg to the ground. I think they had been indicted by individuals in the town for criminal offenses. And they were so angry about it that they slipped into the county seat at night and burned most of it to the ground, resulted in about $5,000 worth of damage, 5,000 of $1877 at that time. And then they fled the county. The governor put out a reward on their heads. The two foremost leaders were Ike Kirk and John Conn, Conn. The Conns were among the very few pro-union families in what later became Elliott County. And so a lot of them were home guards during the Civil War. They fled to West Virginia. The following spring, a posse led by Elliott County Sheriff Harvey Weddington, who was an ex-guerrilla, crossed the Big Sandy River with, according to the newspaper accounts, with 22 Kentucky gentlemen who meant business. And they cornered Ike Kirk in his hideaway in Wayne County, West Virginia, which is just across the Big Sandy from Kentucky. Kirk climbed out of a window onto the porch roof, drew two pistols, leaped to the ground, and shot his way out from the surrounding posse. But he was overtaken, wounded, and captured and brought back to Martinsburg not too long after that. Conn also returned to Elliott County and gave himself up and was in jail in 1879 awaiting trial for arson when the regulator uprising exploded. And the uprising itself was rooted in what could be another interesting topic for another visit. This would be the Underwood War of Carter County. Captain Alf Underwood was given a commission as a lieutenant in the Union Army in 1863. He raised a company, but he never entered the regular service. And so his Tigert home guards were Union guerrillas that operated in the Carter County region, Rowan County, Bath County, Fleming County. As a matter of fact, when Confederate soldiers raided Maysville in the summer of 1863 and plundered the Union men and the Union merchants, why the Union people of Maysville sent a message to Captain Alf Underwood to come back to Maysville and plunder the Southern sympathizers. So the Underwoods were very notorious. And when the war ended, they formed one of the most notorious horse stealing gangs in Kentucky. And I've seen New York Times refer to them as the James Younger Gang of Kentucky. Alfred eventually fled west to Iowa in the mid 1870s, but his other brothers and fellow gang members, including their father, Old George, remained in the Olive Hill area of Carter County. And local vigilantes who referred to themselves as regulators picked them off one by one by one. And finally, in the fall of 1879, September, I believe, Old George and one of his last remaining sons, Jesse, were surrounded in Fort Underwood, their home near Olive Hill. They had actually converted it into a loopholed fortress during the Civil War as home guard leaders, and had a major gun battle with the vigilantes, and both of them were killed. And so that ended the Underwood War, or as some newspapers called it, the Horse Thieves War. And almost within days, a vigilante uprising occurred in Elliott County. And a notice was placed on the courthouse door as a warning to all lawbreakers and criminals from Judge Lynch. And I found in it, I believe it was in the governor's papers, the actual oath that members were required to swear before joining the organization. You do solemnly swear that you are opposed to house burning, robbery, and rape, that you will make yourself a special committee to investigate all cases that come before the order, that you will obey your superior officers in both company and regiment, that you will not reveal any of the secrets of the organization under the penalty of death, and will go on all raids when ordered by your officers under the penalty of 50 lashes, unless you have a lawful excuse for not going. So these were very serious individuals. They were both Union and Confederate veterans, and many of the most respected citizens in Elliott County were part of the organization. Well, during the summer of 1879 in Elliott County, there was a crime wave that was unrelated to what was taking place with the Underwoods in Carter County. But a number of stores were robbed in Elliott and Rowan County. There were particularly brutal instances in which women living alone were tortured by night riders and robbed of their money. In one instance, old Kitty Davis had a noose pulled around her neck, and then she was raised to the joists of the ceiling in her cabin until she revealed where her money was hidden. And there was another instance in which a crippled woman was dragged before the fireplace, and her feet were put into the fire until she revealed where her money was taken. And old Dick Watson, who at that time was probably the last African-American resident of Elliott County, was also robbed, given the same treatment, his feet held to the fire. Another store in Elliott County was also burned to the ground. And there were also horse stealing expeditions, cattle stealing, and some ugly murders. A man brutally beat his wife to death, dragged her out by the hair and beat her to death in the front yard. So this was what sparked the Elliott County uprising. And after Judge Lynch posted their notice, 3 men, suspected outlaws, were captured. J.L. Owensby, who was from North Carolina and had no connection with the people of Elliott, as far as having been born and raised there. John W. Kendall, who was a member of a respected family, ex-Confederate veteran, possibly a guerrilla, and William McMillan, who was known as Bill Muck, who was a guerrilla in Elliott County during the Civil War, were confined in the jail. Owensby confessed, and he identified Kendall and Muck, and along with himself, as being involved in several robberies, also being involved in the a fire that destroyed Malone's store in Newfoundland, which is just north of Sandy Hook. And so once this confession was made, a band of about 100 regulators surrounded the courthouse on the night of, let me check my notes here, October 20th, 1879. And they entered the jail, and Kendall and Muck put up the fight of their lives and had to be physically overpowered before they were dragged out to an elm tree on the courthouse lawns. And both of them were forced to confess, and then they were swung off. And unlike some of the lynchings you might see in old Westerns, where the lynch mob has the decency to shoot the men so they don't slowly strangle to death, Kendall and McMillan strangled to death. And I interviewed the son of one of the vigilantes in the 1980s, and he said his father never forgot for the rest of his life the sound of those two men slowly strangling to death that night. Owensby was spared, but in the jail at that time was our young friend John Kahn, and they attempted, the fellow, of course, who helped burn Martinsburg, they attempted to lynch him. He broke free. They fired several shots at him and wounded him, but he made his way to West Virginia, went into exile. And in the winter of 1880, 1881, he was shot to death in a gunfight over on the other side of Big Sandy. So from this point on, the movement spread into Lawrence County, Boyd County, Carter County, Rowan County, and night riders were the rule of the day. And they not only focused on what we might call today persistent felony offenders or career criminals, but they also sent warnings to lewd women, to drunken, abusive husbands, to drunken husbands who were too lazy to support their families. And they would leave a bundle of switches on your porch in the night. And that was your first and your last warning. And if you were a lewd woman, if you didn't leave the community, or if you were an abusive husband and you didn't change your ways, then they would come and you'd be tied to a tree and brutally whipped as sort of a corrective. They were regulating the morals of the community as well. And there was a wonderful old tradition I collected from Elliott County, where one fellow was really regarded as just probably the laziest man in the county. And they tied him, they were getting ready to tie him to a tree and whip him. And they said, well, if we'll give you corn to feed your family, if you'll promise to change your ways. And he said, is the corn ground? And they said, no. He said, lay on. so he submitted to it. But in March of 1880, another dark incident occurred in Carter County in the Seeking Creek region, just north of the Elliott County line near Olive Hill. 100 regulators surrounded the home of James Binion. They had learned that John Boggs, another man regarded as an outlaw, had sought refuge there. They demanded his release. Binion refused. There was a terrific gun battle. The regulators beat down the door, crashed through the door, shot and killed Binion. Binion's wife had her leg broken. Boggs was dragged out into the front yard and hanged. And I've often wondered, my great-grandfather, Green Prichard, was a Carter County regulator. And my great-great-grandfather, Christopher Columbus Rucker, was also a Carter County regulator. But they told a wonderful story about my great-grandfather Prichard. When he would have to go home, he would have to pass under a tree in which a man was hanged. And that spot was said to be haunted. And so they said that Old Green, if he was traveling there at night, would pull his hat down over his eyes and then whip his horse to a gallop to pass under that tree. And I can't help but wonder if that had been the tree that poor John Boggs was hanged on.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
in the
Wow.
summer of 1880, there was considerable pressure from Governor Luke Blackburn. He threatened to send in the state militia. Uh, the circuit judge of Lawrence County, Judge James E. Stewart, also issued a stern warning to the regulators because when some of their number were captured in that county, they formed a mob, broke into the jail, and broke them out. And so things were looking pretty serious, like there might be a clash between state troops and the vigilantes. And so a truce was arranged. And on May 28th, 1880, Levi J. Stewart, a quote colonel of the Lawrence County Regulators, rode into Louisa, the county seat, with 200 men, and they gave themselves up. And all 200 men would eventually be pardoned by Governor Blackburn. Uh, another member, another leader, Finney, probably for Phineas Rowland, was infuriated by this. He regarded Stewart and others who had arranged this truce as traitors who had betrayed the organization. And he began to boast in the neighborhood that he was going to kill the men who brought about the surrender at Louisa. And not too long after the surrender, sometime in June of 1880, as he was riding along the road, a volley of rifles rang out from the underbrush. And that was the end of Colonel Rowland and his leadership role
Mhm.
in the regulators. And what happened after this is really interesting. And it's a pattern you see in all kinds of vigilante organizations elsewhere. There became a split. Many people began to realize that the vigilantes themselves were getting out of control and were acting as their own judge, jury, and executioner, and driving people from the county that, without really due process, maybe on the basis of rumor and hearsay. So the vigilantes split into two groups: the original regulators, which kept on their course, and the moderators, which attempted to arrest and round up the regulators. And so these two groups clashed. And I collected traditions in Elliott County where Sheriff Weddington, who of course captured Ike Kirk and his men, surrounded and surprised. I'm sorry, what I should say is led raids on regulators and surrounded, surprised, and jailed many of them. And by 1882, the movement had pretty well died down. And in 1883, Governor Blackburn issued a mass pardon for 200 regulators in Elliott County. But this did not end the violence in the region by any means whatsoever. And shortly afterwards, in Rowan County, you would see the Martin Tolliver feud erupt. And to me, there's absolutely no surprise that these large outbreaks of violence, the vigilante uprising, the Underwood Wars, the Martin Tolliver feud, took place in the heart of one of the most guerrilla infested regions in Kentucky. And my personal theory is, let's take one guerrilla band very quickly. Captain Sid Cook was the terror of northeastern Kentucky during the Civil War, based in Elliott County. Uh, he commanded 10, a dozen, 15, maybe 30 men at the most, but he would terrorize a region stretching from present day Elliott all the way to Fleming, Rowan, Bath, Carter, uh, Boyd. It was his men that robbed the Ashland Bank. Lawrence County, in the summer of 1864, his men plundered Paintsville. So, again, with just sometimes only 15 men, and he would wreak that much havoc. And to me, that was a education in violence for those who later became vigilantes and criminals. If you have 10 men, 15 men, like the Underwood Horse Thief Gang, and you're all heavily armed, and particularly if you're heavily armed with Henry rifles or later Winchester rifles, you've got just as much firepower or more powerful firepower than the local high sheriff and his deputies. So small bands of outlaws were able to more or less run amok in northeastern Kentucky well into the 1880s and in some cases the 1890s.
Jim,
I will now open the floor for questions.
We have a lot. Go ahead, David.
James, on a point, one thing that strikes me so odd is with violence in other places, it seems to be more locally tied. But I know some of the research you've done, for example, John P. Martin, you wrote, was affiliated with the Underwoods,
Yes.
shows up in Rowan County. What is making these people gravitate towards new regions of violence that seem otherwise unconnected?
John Martin was originally from Letcher County. His family settled in Rowan County, and they were Union people. And I've seen some evidence that he may have been a home guard during the war. And for all I know, he might have been a member of Underwood's Home Guards, which consisted of Union refugees from Morgan County, present-day Elliott County, Rowan County, and Carter County. And another member of the Underwood group was old Clabe Jones, who was originally from Floyd County, was a Union home guard during the Civil War, settled in Elliott County after the Civil War, and then joined the Underwood gang of horse thieves. And was actually, for some reason, he doesn't mention this in his autobiography, but he actually served a stretch in the Kentucky Penitentiary around 1872 for horse stealing. And so these men, were more or less carrying on the same type of warfare, if you will, that they experienced during the conflict. Only in this case, it was for criminal purposes. They would claim to be, in sort of a Jesse James younger brother's way, that, they were making up for the wrongs that they were subjected to during the war. And of course, I'm sure some of the Elliott County outlaws who were former guerrillas, would have said the same thing. But there's sort of a thin line between waving the bloody shirt and, robbing helpless women and stealing horses on a grand scale and burning down stores and robbing homes, that sort of thing. So yeah, that the seeds of violence that were sown during the war, this was the bitter fruit in the post-war years in this region of the state, and I'm sure other parts of Kentucky as well.
Yeah. So with like a lot of these, it's a pretty interesting lead of events. Like you said, the regulators end up getting regulated by the moderators. Yeah. I mean, how often were raids and stuff happening? I mean, we talking about weekly?
They were
monthly, or
fairly
just
frequent, and of course, the only ones that I'm familiar with are what were reported in the newspaper. But in between raids, there again, only 3 men were lynched, but there were attempted lynchings of others. A youth named Jeff Adkins, who had shot and nearly killed another youth in Elliott County, was targeted for lynching, but he managed to escape. And others again were whipped and driven out of the county. So it was a fairly constant, especially during the, from the fall of 1879 to the early summer of 1880.
how I guess productive, or how well did it curb? It's hard to say this. How well did it curb the violence or people doing bad things? I guess how did it stop it really, or was it just?
I haven't I haven't covered the well. One major obstacle is that the Elliott County Courthouse was destroyed by fire and arson, by the way, in the 1950s, and so all the criminal court records before 1957, I believe, were destroyed, and so that was a real loss. And there were a lot of news reports from Elliott County, 1880s, 1890s, early 20th century, that really didn't deal with vigilantism, but there were minor family feuds and shootouts, including one at a church in which several were killed. But in the 1920s, state troops had to be sent to Elliott County because people were trying to stop the moonshine trade, and the moonshiners murdered several people, and the courts, were brought to a halt, and so they actually had to send state troops to Elliott County. And to be honest, I think Elliott is still one of the poorer counties in Kentucky, and I honestly believe that the violence there is one of the main reasons that it was and remains so. Because in the 1880s, there was an attempt to pass a railroad from Greenup, Kentucky, through Grayson, through Martinsburg or Sandy Hook, and also exploration of coal and mineral and timberlands in Elliott County, but no one was willing to invest there because it was just simply too violent.
Yeah.
So I think that did the county permanent injury, but it's one of the most beautiful counties in the state. My grandmother Thomas was born in Elliott County, and I fell in love with the place when we would take Sunday drives to from Carter County to Sandy Hook. And if you ever visit the county, why take the main road from Grayson to Sandy Hook, and you'll pass through what's known as the Cliffs of Little Sandy. And there are these huge towering sandstone cliffs along the roadway. And that's one of the main reasons that the guerrillas love the place so much, because they can hide up those narrow gorges and in rock houses, caves, and so forth.
Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I was curious about Blackburn's pardoning. I don't know very much about Governor Blackburn, but it seems like he tried to come across as, didn't he do pension reform, prison reform and those sorts of things?
I don't know that much about his administration either, but I do recall that he was interested in prison reform. He was concerned by the overcrowded conditions in the Kentucky penitentiary, and that's what led him to issue a historic number of pardons. And of course, his political enemies tagged him as lenient Luke.
Would you say
all the pardons he issued?
Was that the logic behind pardoning this many people? Or were the regulators just too large to come down on?
Yeah. I'm forced to guess. I'm not aware of any Blackburn personal papers that survived. I haven't found anything in his gubernatorial papers that revealed his state of mind. But my impression is that there were so many involved that he decided just to issue blanket pardons for those who actually came in and surrendered. Remember, there were many, many more who didn't surrender. So we've got 400 plus that we know of, but there could have been another 400 that just simply, faded from the scene and disbanded.
Yeah. Which, a lot of Kentucky, especially around in this area, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, like you said, there was a lot of vigilante justice going on. There was a lot of people raiding or, pulling people out of prisons and hanging them on trees. I mean, it happened a lot.
In the 70s, when I was working on family history, I found out that my grandfather, who passed away when I was 2 years old, the original Jim Prichard,
Mhm.
was in the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, along with his brother Wade. And I asked my grandmother, I said, was this true? And she said, yes. Yeah, he was a member of the Klan. And what intrigued me about that, when I started to research the Klan in Carter County in the 1920s, I mean, nationwide, the Klan was opposed to immigration, the Catholic Church, Jews, and of course, African Americans. Well, this is a rural county uh, with a very small black population, a black population that was almost non existent in the 1920s. And the one African American that I remember seeing as a little boy was actually a Prichard, although he didn't, adopt that name. But the Pritchard's family actually shielded him and wouldn't allow anybody to mistreat him because he was part of their shall we say their extended family. But what the Klan did in the 1920s was the exact same thing that the regulators did. If you were a wife beater, a drunkard, or a lewd woman, they would lay a bundle of switches on your porch and you would be whipped, if you didn't leave the county or, cave into the warning. They also drove criminals from the county. And my grandmother told me that my great uncle was actually involved in killing a man near Olive Hill who was a thief, was constantly stealing from his neighbors. They sent him a warning that he would take a beating if he didn't leave. He didn't. So they came in the night and dragged him out and beat him, and the man died from his injuries. And she said that my grandfather was terrified that his brother was going to be indicted for murder, but nobody talked. And I'm still trying to search the name of who that victim was and when that took place. But they operated just exactly like the regulators of the 1920s. They were a patriotic, church-going, all-American law and order organization uh, in their minds. You know, so they all thought they were doing the right thing and what needed to be done, and that's exactly what their fathers and grandfathers were doing in the 1880s.
Wow. Yeah. That it sounds crazy. It does. But what do you think kind of, I mean, let that die down? What got the hold of it? Just, I mean,
Well, the Klan.
yeah, or just the vigilante justice
Well,
to to that
I
extent.
I think that's a very good question, and I think that with the state police and the National Guard, uh, as law enforcement became more efficient, and justice was served on an equitable basis. But that was the concern of many people in the 1870s, that criminals would be arrested, jailed, and then released on bail, and then would disappear, and then uh, afterwards would show up in the county again, doing the same things again. And so they always felt that the law was overawed, and that makes sense to me because, as I shared with you earlier, I mean, these outlaws were heavily armed.
Mhm.
They were armed with what we would call the military assault style weapons of their generation.
Mhm.
A Colt revolvers and Henry repeating rifles and Winchesters. So I read a report from Carter County in 1865 that said the sheriff in the fall of 1865, the sheriff refuses to serve criminal warrants on anyone unless he has at least a five-man armed escort. And those conditions persisted for a generation, after the Civil War ended. But I think, eventually as law enforcement became more powerful, uh,
Mhm.
you have a state police along with your county sheriffs and local constables and things of that nature that, the odds begin to weigh more in the law enforcement corner.
Mhm. Yeah, and also you think of the court system, wasn't any faster then than it is today. So you would, it's easier for a group of people to just gather up and say, "Hey, let's go deliver the justice," and not let's not wait
Yeah.
around. And like you said, possibly somebody get out and released
Uh,
and so forth. So,
circuit judges were threatened with death
mhm.
if they Judge Stewart of Louisa was received death threats if he dared to try the regulators. And of course, during one of the feuds in Breathitt County in the 1870s, a judge was actually assassinated on the streets of Jackson. So that was another factor too. The judges were often forced to uh, hold court with armed escorts. So again, that made you know it sort of adds a Wild West flavor to
Yeah.
what was really going on in the South and in particularly Appalachian South in those years.
The question I have in regards to that, it seems like calling out the state guard was a common practice from the far east, where you've got um, some of the Klan violence there, to what we've talked about. Is that really effective though? Because the guard can't stay deployed for very long. Was that a useful tactic, or was that more for show?
You know, I think it was meant to be a useful tactic, but the state guards were sent to Carter County to quell the Underwoods in 1877. They surrounded their home, and by the time the state guard got there, they had fled. So they were there more or less for nothing. And state troops were sent to Moorhead during the Tolliver Martin feud. But I can't remember, I'm embarrassed to say, whether this took place before or after the big gun battle in Moorhead, in which really local citizens took up arms on their own right as vigilantes and more or less wiped out the leaders of the Tollivers on the streets of Moorhead. And people talk about the OK Corral and all of that sort of business. That was nothing to the gun battle in Moorhead. That was a really serious gun battle with several people killed. And why that hasn't been made into a movie, I have no idea. But again, I don't think the state guard quelled the Martin Tolliver feud. It was uh, the anti-Tolliver faction that finally took it upon themselves to root out the problem themselves. And the threat of the state guards being sent against the regulators never materialized, but fortunately, they decided to lay down their arms and give themselves up before that happened. So in that case, I think the threat was effective.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, definitely just some wild decades in Kentucky.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, when my
No.
maternal grandparents honeymooned at Niagara Falls in the 1920s, the clerk, as they registered, asked where they were from. And they said Kentucky, and he said, "Well, are your intentions peaceable?" So, and my impression for my grandfather was it wasn't entirely tongue in cheek, but that was the reputation the state had in the early 20th century.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
Dr.
Well, yeah.
Jim Clotter told me years ago that Kentucky had one of the highest homicide rates in the nation up to the 1930s. So, again, you're right. Decades of violence and woe long after the Civil War years.
Yeah. Earning that reputation.
Oh, you better believe it.
Yeah. David, you got any other questions?
I think that covers it well. I've learned some new things tonight, and it's exciting.
Yeah, yeah. James, anything else?
I was going to say I just appreciate the opportunity to talk history with you gentlemen, and maybe sometime in the summer we can get back together and talk about the Underwood War
Yeah, that
or
well, I mean,
the Horse Thieves War,
yeah. The thing
which
is, yeah,
lasted
you,
from 1865 to 1879. So
mhm,
that's roughly just about the same length of time that the James Gang
mhm,
was in
mhm.
business. So, that's saying something to escape the clutches of the law for
Yeah,
that number of years.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. Yeah, there's probably 5 or 6 other topics from this podcast that we can probably delve in a little deeper. Yeah. Well, again, thanks for coming on and talking with us. And yeah, we'll definitely get together and talk some more of that northeastern Kentucky. There's plenty to get into. But yeah, thanks for joining us, David. Thanks for being on as well. Anything else
You're
before we go?
very welcome. Appreciate the invitation and look forward to visiting with you all again.
All
And
right.
I would say, if I could, guerrilla warfare and Civil War Kentucky, right? That came out in February, I think, of 24.
Actually, I'm hoping to get it to the publisher this spring, and I
Okay.
hope it comes out late next year or early 2026.
Mm-hmm.
But it's entitled Cook's Devils, and it's about the Sid Cook that I mentioned tonight. And, in addition to his service for the Confederacy and uh, a number of bank robberies, he gave up his life defending a bordello in Castle Woods, Virginia in 1865 from outraged citizens that he had plundered in his home county of Russell County, Virginia, so that he could set up the bordello in that little town. So as you can see, he was truly a Southern knight. And and he also shot his first lieutenant in an argument over plunder, and left him to die in a Kentucky farmhouse. And so he was a very strict disciplinarian, and if
Mm-hmm.
horses were stolen and he felt he deserved the best one, why, if someone disagreed with him, he would shoot them. And
Wow.
so he's a very, very colorful character. So I've
Wow.
had a lot of fun writing about this guy.
Yeah. Well,
It's,
that sounds good. That sounds like another topic.
just let me know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, again, thanks for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And we'll be in touch soon. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
My
Take care.
pleasure. Have a good night, gentlemen.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.